When we went to Colonial Williamsburg as a family a few years back, we enjoyed peanut soup at one of the restaurants. I was pretty sure that the peanut soup recipe in this book wasn't going to be great. Now, this is not a great preview of the rest of this video because there were several things in this book that we really loved and enjoyed. But the very first thing I tried, I just knew wasn't going to work. It called for 4 cups of water, half a pound of peanut butter, and salt. Now, if I was going to be making this again, I would add broth instead of water. Now, I do know this is a Depression era cookbook, so understandably, maybe the resources weren't there to make this rich and delicious. Also, I'd probably add some whole peanuts to give it a little bit of texture or use a crunchy peanut butter, and I would use a lot more peanut butter than this recipe called for. It really just tasted like hot, watered down peanut butter. One thing I noticed about these old recipes, a lot of them call for instructions that we no longer do today. So one is sifting together the flour and the dry ingredients like baking powder, baking soda, salt. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that is because there used to be some bran in the flour. It wasn't as filtered and white as it is today. Or maybe they just felt like that made the ingredients fluffier, more blended together. Personally, this is a step that I'm glad we no longer do. It just seems like an extra step. I don't really have a sifter, so I was just using a little mesh strainer, but I think it kind of does the same thing. Another thing I noticed in most of the recipes is they separated the egg white from the egg yolk, added the egg yolks separate, and then used a hand mixer to make the egg whites fluffy before folding them in. Almost every recipe called for this. Again, I can't notice enough of a difference to be worth that extra effort for me personally. Now, these are cereal waffles. I was intrigued by them because I like the idea of using leftover oatmeal in a waffle. It's a great way to use up leftovers because a lot of times when I make oatmeal, I'll make a huge batch, and by the time we're actually done with it, people are kind of sick of oatmeal. So I like the idea of putting them into a waffle to reuse them in a new way. So this recipe calls for 1 cup of cold cooked oatmeal, a cup of flour, 2 eggs separated, a cup of milk, a tablespoon baking powder, a half teaspoon salt. It asks for you to sift flour, salt, and baking powder, add the egg yolks, milk, and cold cereal, beating well to get rid of the lumps. Beat the egg whites to a stiff froth and fold them gently into the batter. Cook at once in hot greased waffle irons. Serve with butter, syrup, or honey. The kids love these. We'll definitely be making them again. As many of you know, we are moving into our new home very, very soon, and we're trying to figure out where everything's going. It's a whole new house, so a lot of the furniture, it's not very straightforward. One thing I know for sure is that this bed and this mattress are going in our room because we have a Birch Living mattress. Now, Birch is the sponsor of today's video. I love the Birch mattresses throughout our home because 1, they're very comfortable. But the first reason that I went with Birch is because they craft mattresses that are made from natural and organic materials. They are free from polyurethane foams and fiberglass. So unlike the conventional manufacturing process of making mattresses, there's no off-gassing with a Birch mattress. We spend a third of our lives in bed, so it makes sense to prioritize that sleep environment. Of course, in my home, I love making the space beautiful and comfortable, but it's also important that that space is as healthy as possible just because of how much time is spent there. We also have a new baby, and so she is in our room. Another reason why it's been super important for us to invest in Birch mattresses. Now, we have several Birch mattresses throughout our home. We've been adding them little by little throughout all of the rooms. Luke and I were kind of configuring how it's going to go in the new house, and we realized that we need even more Birch mattresses now as our younger kids get older and transition into twin beds. I love that Birch also offers the Birch Kids mattress. These are great because they grow with your children. They are firmer on one side for younger kids, and then on the other side a bit softer as they get older and desire that comfort. You're no longer worried about that surface being super firm. So I love that they can grow so that investment lasts a long time and they have that healthy sleep environment throughout their childhood. In our room, we have the king size Birch Luxe mattress, which is the premium upgrade to the well-loved Birch Natural mattress, which we also have in some of the kids' rooms. Super comfortable. Springtime is all about renewal, cleaning your home, refreshing your space, prioritizing wellness. Birch mattresses are made with naturally hypoallergenic materials which can help reduce exposure to common allergens like dust mites and mold. So if you're sensitive or have seasonal allergies, this is a great step to create a cleaner sleep space. Right now, Birch is offering Farmhouse On Boon viewers 20% off your order with my link, birchliving.com/farmhouse. You can also grab this QR code right here and I'll link it down in the description box below. Again, thank you so much, Birch, for sponsoring today's video. The next thing I am making are these ham and potato patties from page 9 of this Depression era recipes cookbook. I like this one because just like with the cereal waffles, this one also uses up leftovers. This one uses up leftover mashed potatoes, which is another thing that when we have too many of, I try to reserve them, but they don't heat up great. Now, when I do, I'll add a little extra milk or butter so that way they don't get too dry and stick to the pan. But it's nice to have something you can throw them in to use in a whole new way. Of course, making potato patties without the ham is something that I have done in the past, but I really love this. It stands alone. It's great for a breakfast or a side dish. My kids gobbled these right up. So you use 1.5 cups of leftover mashed potatoes, 1 egg, 1 cup cooked ham chopped, 1 tablespoon onion. Now it does not specify if this is a diced onion or onion powder. I went with onion powder and I didn't quite do a tablespoon because that seemed like a lot. So maybe they did mean diced onion. Nonetheless, I did use onion powder and a little pepper. It says mix together potatoes and egg with a fork, add ham, onion, and pepper, shape into flat patties, dip in a little flour, and fry in bacon fat or lard. Serve hot. I keep a tub of lard in my refrigerator for so many things. I get this from the butcher when I order a whole hog, and I love having it. It is great for frying so many things. It also works very well in biscuits in place of the butter. I noticed that a lot of these Depression era recipes do call for lard instead of butter, which totally makes sense. When I was looking through this book and trying to figure out what to start with, what to make first, I wanted things that I really haven't made before, but also use staple ingredients that are in my kitchen that maybe I could find a new way to use them. And this pork chop casserole really fit the bill. It calls for 4 thick pork chops, 2 to 3 tart apples, 4 sweet potatoes peeled, salt and pepper, and 1/4 cup of water. Now I felt like the sweet potatoes, there was a little too many of them, so I didn't quite do 4. I had 2 large. The recipe says wipe off chops, place in a deep covered casserole, peel and slice apples, place on chops, sprinkle with salt and pepper, slice potatoes 1/2 inch thick, which I also noticed, whoops, I did not do that. I actually sliced them quite a bit thinner than that. And put on top of apples, salt and pepper, add water, cover tightly and bake 1 hour at 400 degrees. Uncover till browned on top. You can use regular white potatoes in place of sweet potatoes. This is a good one-dish meal. They don't seem to tire of it either, it says. Another thing I noticed about this book is that all of the ingredients are very simple. I didn't have to go to the store and get a whole bunch of things that we don't keep. They called for things that are easily locally available, pantry staples, staples in the freezer, a lot of things that if you were a small farming family, you had a homestead, you would have raised on your own, which again, totally makes sense. This one turned out great. The kids like to top their pork with mustard. That's just what they like to do. So we served this with mustard and it went over very well. The next thing I made is poor man's soup. This is something that the family all really loved. I don't know why, but we don't do a ton of rice and beans, but we really should because the kids like them. They're very economical. The way this recipe reads is pick over beans and soak overnight. Simmer soup bone in 8 quarts water for several hours. Add beans, simmer 45 minutes. Meanwhile, fry beef and onion, add to soup along with remaining ingredients and simmer for 1 hour. So I used some beef soup bones. Now they actually had quite a bit of meat on them. So my soup had more meat than what this poor man's soup recipe called for, but nobody complained about that. A couple different meats because I did some ground beef for the other meat, which this recipe did call for, and then the additional meat that fell off of the soup bones. So the ingredients in this recipe: 1 soup bone, of course it doesn't say here, but 8 quarts of water, that's the broth that is cooking the soup bone, or the water that's cooking the soup bone to make the broth. 1 cup dry pea beans. I assumed that meant these black-eyed peas. I don't know. Luke's like, I've never seen these in our house, but they taste just like any other bean. Quite good. 2 cups tomatoes. I used a can of tomatoes. 1 cup chopped celery. 1 cup diced potatoes. a half a cup of raw rice, 1/3 pound ground beef. That's a small amount of beef, but there's a lot of protein when you do the pea beans. 1/3 cup chopped onion, salt and pepper, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of basil. This is really a simple soup, and of course you don't need a recipe for something like this. Any soup bones you have with water, let those simmer overnight or even for several days. Sometimes I will have a perpetual soup or stock pot going. You can add some celery tops and onion scraps to make it more delicious. And then once that's strained off, adding in what you have, what beans you have, what meat you have, adding rice or barley. That's another great carb to add to a soup. Some kind of vegetable like tomatoes. If it's summertime and they're fresh, that's great. Otherwise, I keep a lot of canned tomatoes on hand. Herbs, spices, salt, pepper. It's the type of soup that I really like to make in my house all the time. But it was really fun to follow the recipe directly from how this book calls for it. The next thing, I don't know how to pronounce. My daughter looked through this book as well, and she found this recipe, and it's something that we'll make more often. Again, it's kind of a similar formula to what we already make, probably not with the addition of the cube cheese. I hadn't thought to do that, but it is called, I'm sure some of you know what this is, and you're like, you're pronouncing it all wrong. Slumgullion? That's what I'm going to call it. But it was so delicious. I should have doubled or tripled it because everybody loved it. I was just trying to follow the recipe as it is written. So for this one, you use 4 slices of bacon, 2 cups of meat cooked, half an onion diced, 1 can tomatoes, and 1.5 cups of cheese cubed. Brown bacon in a heavy saucepan, drain and set aside. Fry onion and bacon fat over low heat. Stir and cook until onion is transparent. Add tomatoes, beef, and bacon. Simmer 5 minutes. Stir in cheese, pour into tureen, and serve over fresh bread. If the family is getting anxious for supper, to be ready, set the table. It will encourage them. We serve this over sourdough bread, a sourdough boule made with whole grain flour, of course, our favorite bread. It would be really great toasted, but I love simple things like this. A bunch of things I always keep on hand, just all kind of tossed together. Add the protein of that cheese and ground beef, which anything that calls for ground beef, I like to have a big arsenal of those because it thaws so quickly. So even if I have no plans whatsoever, nothing's laid out, I can still get a meal like this on the table fast. Next up, corn fritters. We really liked these. My kids ate them just as fast as they came out of the pan. We just didn't even wait for lunchtime. Just started serving them and everybody loved them. So this calls for a can of corn, a cup of flour, which whole grain would have been great. I was just trying to follow these recipes as is, but once I start making things a few times and they're something that we are making regularly, I adapt them exactly for how our family would want to eat them. I think this would work fabulously with whole grain. A teaspoon of baking powder, 2 teaspoons salt, a 1/4 teaspoon paprika, 2 egg yolks beaten thick, and 2 egg whites beaten stiff. Again, next time I would definitely just skip that part. It says chop up corn. I would also skip that because I think, it's really hard to chop up corn, I found, and 2, I don't feel like it makes much difference because there were several pieces of whole corn in here, and it was just fine, so I probably would just skip that. Sift flour, baking powder, salt, and paprika. Add to corn and mix. Add egg yolks and stir thoroughly. Fold in egg whites. Fry by spoonfuls in hot, fresh lard until light brown. Drain and serve hot. And we sure did, and everyone loved it. I am making cheese biscuits, which is great. It's just like regular biscuits, except with a bit of cheese, so a bit of added protein, a little extra flavor. I wanted to read out of this book the chief requirements for good biscuits. This is what it says. 1, a very soft dough, so soft as to be almost sticky. 2, very little handling, because much manipulation destroys their lightness. 3, a very quick oven. If biscuits are not allowed to touch each other in the pan, they'll be lighter and more delicate than when placed close together. So I tried to follow these requirements for good biscuits. The recipe calls for 2 cups of flour, half a teaspoon of salt, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, 2 tablespoons of shortening. Now, I didn't have shortening, and I wouldn't have shortening. I instead used the same lard that I've been using. 3/4 cup milk or milk and water mixed if you don't have enough milk. Sift dry ingredients, rub in the shortening. Again, I used lard as lightly as possible with fingers until just blended. Have milk as cold as possible and mix with flour to form a soft dough. Mix with a flexible knife rather than a spoon, as the steel blade is colder than a spoon, and also because the knife cuts and mixes more thoroughly. I didn't do that, but I should have. Turn out onto a well-floured board. Pat to 3/4 inch thick. Cut into rounds. Put on a baking pan, being sure they do not touch. Bake at 425 degrees, 12 to 14 minutes. Now for the cheese biscuits, it says 1 recipe of basic biscuits and 2 to 4 tablespoons of cheese grated. I think I could have added a lot more cheese and it would have been just as delicious, if not more so. It actually had so little cheese with the 2 to 4 tablespoons that the next day when these were left over, some of my kids topped them with jam. I was like, it's cheesy. Why do you like the jam? And they're like, I hardly taste the cheese, so the jam's fine. But good either way. I remember my grandmother, who passed away a few years ago, anytime she made vegetables, she would talk about how she likes them to just be steamed or baked with a little bit of salt because her mother always ruined it with a cheese sauce. She felt like they were fresh and delicious, but then they were always made heavy and creamy with all of the butter and the cheese. And I see what she's saying if that is something that people did all the time with all their vegetables, but we don't really do that a lot today. In fact, I mean, maybe some of you do. I personally never make vegetables in a sauce, and I was intrigued by the idea in this book. So this recipe for creamed cauliflower and green beans calls for a small cauliflower, a cup of green beans, 2 tablespoons butter, 2 tablespoons flour, ½ teaspoon salt, pepper or paprika, and a cup milk that, in parentheses, may be part cream. Wash cauliflower and break into florets, clean beans and cut into pieces. Cook together until tender. I did this in just a little bit of water with the lid on. Melt butter, remove from stove, add flour and seasoning, stir until smooth, add milk slowly, put back on the stove and stir and cook until the sauce is smooth and thickened, and then add it to the vegetables. And then it also said good with buttered breadcrumbs on top, and I totally forgot about that, but that does sound delicious. I really like the idea of making a sauce for vegetables, especially one that has clean, wholesome, healthy ingredients, because it does make them more delicious, more creamy, probably something better for a winter meal, maybe in the spring and summer, the more fresh vegetables, but to jazz up those that maybe have been frozen or aren't quite as fresh. These tasted great. Want to add plenty of salt, of course, but we really enjoyed them. As a modern day food blogger, this next recipe kind of cracked me up because we have to be very, very specific when it comes to writing out recipes, or we get tons of questions in the comments. These old books really assumed a little bit of knowledge, or assumed that you could kind of make it work and read between the lines, if you will. I like this one especially. It says, peelings from 2 oranges, sugar, no amounts here. It just says, slice orange peels into thin shreds, put in a saucepan, cover with water. How much water? That's your guess. Boil until tender. Measure and add the same amount of sugar as you have peel and juice. So again, just, kind of just see where you land with that. Boil again until syrup is nearly all boiled away. When partly cool, add milk, beaten egg, melted butter, flour, salt, and baking powder. Let stand 25 minutes. Bake at 325 degrees for 1 hour. So it called for a cup of milk, 1 egg, 2 tablespoons butter, 4 cups flour, sifted of course, a pinch of salt, and 4 teaspoons of baking powder. Now, even though this one kind of left it all up to you and how you're feeling about the sugar and the water, it actually tasted quite great. Now, I did not have a loaf pan. I totally forgot that I brought a bunch of stuff out to the house. We have an issue here at the house that we have to fix before renters move in, and it was in our pantry area where I keep a bunch of stuff. So we decided that I would bring a bunch of stuff out to our new cabinets. And I have missed so many things that I thought, I'll just use my Dutch ovens and make bowls, and I won't worry about all the things I brought out there. Well, since then I've tried to make cheesecake. I have no cheesecake pan. I've tried to make this loaf. I have no loaf pan, but we made it work. I just kind of pressed it into this little casserole dish, and it made a lovely bread. I do feel it was a little bit dry. I should have added a bit more water, even though, it wasn't super specific on the amount, but I probably could have noticed that when I was mixing the dough together. It was a bit dry, but it was also good. We ended up turning a lot of this into a French toast casserole. Well, I hope that you enjoyed cooking some of these different recipes. There are several things that I want to add to our regular rotation here in our home, and I hope the same for you. As always, thank you so much for following along.